Welcome to Walker of Worlds podcast. My name's Rachel, and this is a podcast where we take a look at some long lost and little known spooky stories and urban legends. Liverpool is a city of many faces. Like many UK cities, it's known for a vibrant music scene and is known as the world capital city of pop. It's the home to Merseybeat, a genre of music that became popular in the 1950s and 60s with a mixture of British and American rock and roll, rhythm and blues, skiffle, pop and music hall. The Cavern Club, the venue made famous by the Beatles, still exists, except slightly along the street from the site of the original club. Before music became one of Liverpool's largest exports, the city was primarily known for its shipping routes, with a lot of the produce that the country needed arriving via the city. Because of this, a number of shipping companies, both for trade and travel, were established within the city limits. One of them tragically became known around the world when, in April 1912, one of its ships struck an iceberg and sank on its maiden voyage. We are, of course, talking about the White Star Line. While the Titanic never visited Liverpool, she was registered there as White Star's headquarters were in the city, hence why she bore Liverpool on her hull. White Star's former office building on James Street is now a hotel and restaurant, with some of the company's features still intact. There's also a number of memorials, museums and exhibitions dedicated to the Titanic throughout the city. The River Mersey cuts through the city before joining the Irish Sea. Liverpool's port sees a number of ferries depart every day and over 200,000 cruise passengers passing through every year. With shopping, museums, art galleries, live music and much more, Liverpool is a cultural hub which sees millions of visitors every year. But we're not here to talk about all of that. We never are. Bold Street is a one-way street which runs adjacent to Liverpool Central Station. Dotted with a number of bars, eateries and independent businesses, Bold Street is a popular destination for locals and visitors alike thanks to its proximity to public transport. To many people, Bold Street just looks like a regular commercial street. There's shops and pubs and bars and restaurants. But to some, it's a street where strange things happen. Welcome to the story of the Bold Street time slips. There are so many stories from this part of Liverpool that it's impossible to collect them all, so we've put together a few of the best ones to tell you. In 1996, Frank set off with his wife to go shopping in Liverpool city centre. His wife decided that she wanted to go and buy a book at Waterstones, the UK's largest chain of bookstores. As they approached Bold Street, Frank decided to go to another shop first but bumped into a friend and stopped to chat in the street. His wife went ahead without him. A few moments later, Frank said goodbye, visited his shop and turned to go back to meet his wife. After reaching Bold Street, he headed on towards the bookstore. As he approached, he glanced up and was surprised to see the name Cripps above the door. As he was about to cross over to see what was going on, a van swept past him with the name Cardins on the side. The van driver honked his old-fashioned horn and drove on past. Looking around, Frank suddenly realised that things were not quite what they should be. He looked at the cars driving past and realised that they were all old-fashioned vehicles, such as people would drive back in the 50s and 60s. And then he noticed the people. Men were wearing hats and macks, and the women were dressed in headscarves, full skirts, and had old-fashioned hairstyles such as women wore just after the war. By this time, Frank was beginning to feel slightly freaked out. He carried on crossing the road and headed towards the store. As he got closer, he noticed the shop's window display of handbags, shoes, and umbrellas looked fairly dated. Suddenly, he saw a young woman standing looking totally bemused up at the shop sign. She was wearing modern clothes, and as she saw him approaching, she smiled. Frank went into the shop, closely followed by the young woman. When they entered, he was surprised and pleased to see that it had indeed turned back into a bookshop. The young woman smiled, shook her head and said, "That was strange. I thought it was a new clothes shop." Then she walked away looking extremely puzzled. This may sound an unlikely tale, but the odd thing is that Frank was in fact a former police officer and definitely wasn't the type of person who would believe in the paranormal. Frank never stopped talking about his experience. Was this a time slip? Evidently, Cripps was a woman's shop that sold clothes and other goods, and Cardins was a well-known Liverpool firm that owned vans around the time that Frank found himself in. Interestingly, the lady that Frank spoke to in front of Cripps came forward to clarify the story. Not only that, but she also confirmed that she'd had numerous time slips around Liverpool and other cities, including Edinburgh. In 2006, Sean was unfortunately shoplifting in Liverpool when he was cut off by a security guard. Deciding to make a break for it, Sean ran down Hanover Street. Trying to shake off the guard, Sean, who was 19 at the time, turned into a dead-end street called Brooks Alley. By this time, he was out of breath and started to get a tight sensation in his chest. He soon realised that actually it wasn't a problem with him, but the atmosphere around him. He waited for the guard to come around the corner after him, but the other man never appeared. So, thinking that he had given him the slip, Sean sauntered back out and started to walk down Hanover Street again, but he soon realised that something was wrong. The road looked different and so did the pavement. He noticed cars driving by that looked very old-fashioned, and the roadworks that he knew were there were now gone. Soon he saw that the people around him were wearing strange clothes. Crossing over to Bold Street, he noticed that there was a traffic lights where there hadn't been any before, and bushes growing around the theatre near a bar that he recognised. He carried on walking, realising that something was really odd. Then he began to panic. He realised that he somehow stepped back in time, and that the time slip was not going away. Then he remembered his mobile phone. Taking it out of his pocket, he tried to get a signal, but of course it didn't work. Eventually he began to really panic, but spotted a kiosk selling newspapers and headed over. Leaning over the newspaper stand, he took a look at the front page of the Daily Post. There in bold lettering was the date, the 18th of May 1967. He wondered what to do. What happened if he couldn't get back to his own time? What about family and friends? So, speeding up his pace, he reached H. Samuel the jeweller's and tried his phone once again. This time it worked. Sighing with relief, he looked around and realised that he had returned to the present. But the strange thing was, he could still see down the end of the road people still walking around in 1967. By this time, Sean had seen enough and dived onto a bus to go home. When he was interviewed by the local newspaper, he recounted his story no less than 4 times. You may think that Sean was making the story up to escape from the guard, but the strange tale didn't end there. When the security guard was interviewed, he stated that when he ran after Sean and turned down the dead-end alley after him, he said that Sean had vanished into thin air. When the newspaper checked out the facts of Sean's story, they found out that everything he said was historically accurate. Imogen had decided to go into Liverpool to buy her sister Abigail a few things for her new baby. Upon arriving, she was happy to see a new mother care store had just opened up on the corner of Lord Street and Whitechapel. She wandered around the store and picked up a few baby items such as cardigans, bibs and gloves. While initially surprised to see how cheap everything was, she assumed that they were on offer as the store had just opened. Taking them to the counter, she tried to pay with her credit card. The staff member looked at her suspiciously and went off to get a manager. When she came back, the staff member looked at the card and told Imogen that they didn't take credit cards. Disappointed, Imogen went and put the items back as she didn't have any actual money on her. When she got home, she told her mother what had happened. Her mother was surprised and really puzzled. "That store closed years ago," she said. "There's a bank there now. In fact, that's where I have my account." Not believing her, Imogen took her mother back to the same place the very next day. Sure enough, the store wasn't there. It was a bank, just as her mother had told her. For those who are curious, Mother Care is a UK-based retailer specialising in products for expectant mothers. The company was founded in 1961 and ceased trading in 2019. While Imogen's story doesn't have a date attached to it, we can only assume that it took place in the past handful of years. At the top of Lee Street, and just a hop across from Bold Street, are the remains of St Luke's Church, which suffered major damage in the May Blitz of Liverpool during World War II. One evening, about 11 years ago, Mr C was in Liverpool city centre. It was December and he had been to the hi-fi shop, which was situated at the top of Bold Street. He was now on his way to meet a friend for a drink before going home. The weather was cold and the streets were icy. Mr C made his way to Lee Street and then turned down the side of the church. As he passed the church, he looked up and was surprised to see that the lights were on inside of the church. He thought how unusual it was, as the church was derelict, not even having a roof. Occasionally there was a light shining in the porch, but nothing more. Mr C was amazed, but assumed the church had been renovated since he had last been past it. Shortly before Christmas, Mr C was again passing St Luke's. However, this time he noticed that the church was again in blackness and was derelict and locked. Did Mr C step back in time to a period when the church was in use? Possibly. However, St Luke's holds open days and is sometimes used to host events within the roofless sanctuary. Still, seeing it lit up on a dark winter night when you're used to it being locked up could be a spooky and strange experience. Mr B had a lady friend who was very much a skeptic concerning matters of the paranormal. In the 80s, she worked in Liverpool city centre, and if the weather was pleasant, she would sit outside and eat her lunchtime sandwiches. One particular day, being sunny and warm, she decided to sit on a bench which was situated diagonally opposite Waterstone's bookshop on Bold Street. As she sat down, she noticed that the sun did not seem as bright as it had been moments before. In fact, looking back in later years, she described the light similar to when the area had a partial solar eclipse. She also noticed that the street did not seem as busy as it had been, which struck her as unusual for the time of day, with 12:30 p.m. being the height of lunch hour. She sat down next to a very smartly dressed man who had already been sitting on the bench and started to unwrap her sandwiches. The gentleman engaged her in conversation and they chatted about inconsequential matters as strangers do. As she chatted, the thought crossed her mind that although smart and very amicable, the gentleman next to her appeared to be dressed in an out-of-date fashion reminiscent of the clothes popular in the 1950s. As they were chatting, the man asked her a question. As she replied, she leaned forward to put her sandwich wrapper in the waste bin next to the side of the bench. She took her eyes off the man for a split second as she dropped the wrapper into the bin and carried on replying to his question. On sitting up again, she was astonished to realise that the man had completely vanished. She immediately scanned the area for him, but he was nowhere to be seen and could not have run off in the split second she had looked away. At the same instant, the sun returned to its ordinary brightness and the area was once again more crowded with people. From the ones that are online, it makes you wonder who hasn't stepped forward with their time slip story. These events happen so often that local and national newspapers and blogs often pick the stories up. A local paranormal author has all but made his career because of them. But what causes them? One theory is right beneath the feet of those who walk up and down Bold Street. Beneath the streets of central Liverpool is a commuter railway. Much like the London Underground, only part of Merseyrail's 75 miles of track are beneath ground. A good chunk of those are in the area around Bold Street. In fact, Bold Street sits on the edge of a rough circle of line that connects Moorfields, Liverpool Lime Street and Liverpool Central. Some people claim that the tracks and trains are, when in operation, having the same effect as the Large Hadron Collider that straddles the French-Switzerland border. The electromagnetic frequencies produced by the trains as they orbit this small section of track is believed to be causing people to momentarily step back in time. Whether this theory is true or not is another matter, although interestingly most people in the time slips find themselves being transported back to the 1960s. Merseyrail was officially opened in 1977, which means that construction would have been taking place in the 60s, so don't rule out the rail link just yet. In fact, the Brooks Avenue event took place in what is believed to be the very centre of the 600-volt Wirral Line Circle. Liverpool is a fantastic city with a lot to offer, especially if you're a fan of music and history. If you do find yourself there, make sure to take a walk down Bold Street and let us know what you see. Thank you so much for listening. If you like your stories a little on the weird side, please feel free to check out our website at www.roswellpublishing.co.uk. And until next time, stay spooky.